When you can smile through the pain, when you create beauty, when no one ever tells you you are beautiful, when your love is ride or die, even though no one has expressed that sentiment to you, when you can create an oasis anywhere. That's Black Girl Magic and the story of Catherine Sloper. The whole premise of my story, Hamilton Heights, although the story is based on Henry James's Washington Park, unlike that story, this Catherine is strong and smart and creative and imaginative, even when being told these things and never being congratulated about these qualities. And her creative side will save her in the face of loss, actually tremendous loss and rejection. She would create a world of beauty in spite of never being told so, or never being encouraged to do so. Because she was born into a family where her own father, God rest his soul, was the golden child of 5 children, of which he was the oldest. Two younger brothers who runs the family co-op and are continued members of the board, and his 2 sisters, Lavinia Sloper, who last name really is impediment, and her aunt Almond. He would serve 3 combat tours in Vietnam and Cambodia, and would go on to have a very successful career at the same time when the Black Panthers were protesting this war. His younger brothers were members of that particular organization, and it continued until the today or the current times. He would use his combat pay and invest back into the neighborhood, subsequently saving the family home and businesses from foreclosure during the time where Harlem suffered from the inner city blight that would consume and destroy entire neighborhoods. And his foresight and investment in placing this family property in trust would save it for generations to come. And his daughter, Catherine, would be a direct beneficiary of it. The world of Hamilton Heights, or Stivers Row or Harlem, is probably no bigger than about 20 city blocks. It was initially discovered by a Danish man named after his beloved town of Haarlem in Amsterdam. It would become a world of creatives in music and in poetry, and the starting spark of the civil rights movement. And it was in Harlem Hospital where Martin Luther King, several decades earlier, would survive one of many assassination attempts before that one that took his life on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel. But it would also become a place where the Sloper family would multiply and build their own businesses. And at one point, there were over 100 members of the Sloper family that expanded between Hamilton Heights, the park, the 20 blocks that comprise most of Harlem, in West and East Harlem. Everyone admired them, and at most points envied them. And when Austin Sr. would date his high school sweetheart, Ophelia, her family was one of the families that lived at 141st in Amsterdam, the apartment building, for a number of years. She would come with her single mother and 2 brothers from Philadelphia when her grandmother took ill, and they would care for her until she would die several months later. She would continue on in that apartment when her siblings would leave one at a time, both being members of the New York prison system for the most majority of their adult lives. She had already gone on, stayed in school, and started her relationship with Austin Sr. They would remain sweethearts from the time she was a sophomore and then graduated from high school until the time he first signed up and was deployed over to Vietnam. He encouraged her and admired her smartness, and when she wanted to study to be a pediatrician, he supported her through her time at Columbia and through her studies at the medical school, and then at her residency and when she took her clerkship at Harlem Hospital. And it didn't matter to him that they had to move up their wedding day when she found out she was pregnant, because he wanted his child to be legitimate and an active member in the Sloper family. His goal was to carry on the Sloper name, and he took that responsibility very seriously. He would go on to earn several silver medals in spite of that most hated war, while his wife received accolades throughout medical school, her residency, and in her practice. And one of the things that you will notice is all the pictures of the family gatherings, the family in general, how elegant everyone looked and how happy everyone looked. There were pictures of Austin Sr. when he wasn't deployed, teaching his son how to ride his bike, the family's birthday party. And at a time when Harlem was so blighted, this family had a very insular and secure world, with the family home being restored to its previous greatness, with the crown molding, the steps, highly polished antiques from England, and it looked like an old school English manor house of yore. It seems like his mother Mamie and Austin Sr. had very similar tastes. He actually was very talented. He was not only a talented carpenter, he was also a very accomplished musician. And no doubt that his godfather was the late, great Duke Ellington. And there's pictures of Duke Ellington showing him or teaching him how to play. The family was known among the glitterati of Harlem for a number of years. Some of the brightly colored library had stacks and stacks of books and stacks of music. And even though Ophelia was little when her father would eventually pass away, he had already started teaching her scales, and she was a little prodigy even without the encouragement of her mother. And so was her brother. He also was a very talented musician as well as an artist. His pictures and some of his drawings are still decorating the portion of the house that is inhabited by his mother. And it was obvious that even though she didn't want to, she did have a preference for her son because he was an extension of her father. And she never was taught how to love another girl, even though this little girl was almost a spitting image of her. There are other scrapbooks and paintings of children, pretty little girls and boys with plaits flying and fat thighs pumping, with happiness playing amongst the trees. You would see progression of Austin Jr. riding his bike in the street, teaching his own sister how to ride the bike, playing stickball and handball and hopscotch and paper dolls on the neighboring stoops. And as he got older, his dream was, through ROTC, was to go into the Army just as his father had did. He saw this as a mechanism to get him out of New York City. But this was not meant to be. His life would be cut short as a crackhead decided to steal his drugs instead of paying for them. And as he absconded, well, at least he thought he absconded, ran down the same street that a 7-year-old cat was playing skipping rope as she waited for her brother to come home from ROTC practice. When the initial bullets ran out, AJ reacted viscerally, looking for his sister, and as he snatched his sister out of the way as the gangbangers drove by, he would catch one single bullet to the back of his head, and as his body crumpled over and protecting a 7 or 8-year-old Catherine, the golden child, the spitting image of her father, gave his life to protect hers. And then the next scene is you would hear the mother screaming and coming up on the scene, flinging Catherine out of the way and cradling her son, saying, "I thought I told you to stay in the house. Look what you did." And then her aunt Ophelia piling on, saying that you really done it now. And then there's the scene cuts to a large church service with a grieving mother at the graveside or inside of the church, and Ophelia has her arm around the mother, and again Catherine is actually off to the side, and no one is comforting her. She had, in a very short period of time, lost both her brother and her father, two of the most people that genuinely loved her more than anything. So even though she was not getting the support of love consistently from either her mother and then her aunt Lavinia, and when she could no longer or was no longer allowed to hang her creations on the wall or in the scrapbooks, she started helping her uncles create outdoor spaces, and it seems like she actually had a significant green thumb, where she would draw up the plans for their small backyard and the roof, and with her help in coaxing the flowers and the vegetables into existence, it would then go on to supply those fresh offerings for the co-op, and they would then also be used, or her designs would go on to be used into community gardens throughout the 5 boroughs. And this was done even with no help from her mother nor encouragement. It was just very strange that when her brother died, her world became more insular, and there was always times when the mother would just not even recognize her existence. She always demanded quiet when she was actually at home. Any exuberance or any show of extra care from Catherine was always rebuffed by her mother. And Lavinia only became a sycophant to the mother because she had nowhere else to go. So little Catherine started creating a world where she could create beauty and she could create through flowers and some other things. Uh, she would, she had a natural talent, unlike the Catherine Sloper in The Heiress. This Catherine had a natural talent for music as well as for drawing and craft, and painting. The family that were on her street and basically throughout Harlem were enjoyed her stylings, either the piano and the harp, for a number of years, but they knew somewhere between 5 and 7 o'clock the music would stop, unless she would be playing in church or elsewhere. And that was their cue that it was time to prepare their own meals and get ready for the next day. And this is where Catherine comes in, where she's running a little bit late and she's preparing to go to her cousin's combination graduation engagement party at her Aunt Almond's house, which was several brownstones over, up on 141st Street. And it is in one of these meetings that, and it's from this meeting that instead of her getting delivered one of that awful looking dress, she actually has a boho chic style that she knows her mother would not approve of, and she doesn't even bother showing it to her. She just sits with her aunt Lavinia, getting ready and talking to her about the day's event, and her aunt Lavinia is just encouraging her not to sit over in the corner and interact with the other young people. And of course, Catherine initially is like, yeah, why are you telling me this? You know it is not going to happen. If I don't know the people there, I'm not probably going to say a whole bunch. And I know I'm not going to dance. But just like her own home, her Aunt Almond's home also has a piano. And one of her the fiancés and that are getting married, they all play several different instruments, and they end up going, oh, that would be kind of fun. They are the music trio, and she ends up entertaining at the party. So the rest of the people, the women, I thought were interesting or of interest in the book. The women, or the people that are closest to her, are the ones that don't accept her, with the exception of her Aunt Almond. Her mother, as I said previously, and a little bit more, and just to kind of compound on the backstory, the family actually acquired the property through a white family, and a white Jewish family, as everyone not of color was fleeing Harlem in Harlem's heyday. The home and apartment were set up as a community trust, protecting it from ever being sold away or over leveraged. And the participants bought interest or had shares within the trust. They had the option to reinvest a portion of their dividends back into the properties, or have a specific income from the property itself. So when Catherine set up his portion was a little bit larger than most of the original sons, because he had used so much of his combat pay to invest in the upkeep and the saving of the property from foreclosure. And it was set up that only his descendants, blood descendants, that means his children, would actually be able to benefit from and have a nice income from that particular property. And it ended up being a tidy sum, because she got his father's interest, her brother who passed, and then hers. And it didn't matter if they were male or female. So added to a nice tidy sum of almost 80 grand a year, because as the property was maintained and then upgraded, they could charge higher rents, and they got a pretty good living from all the other businesses that the family had owned. So she actually was getting a pretty tidy sum without even working. And also, because she was a direct descendant of her father, who was truly the golden boy, she had access to the family home for the entirety of her life. And she didn't have to depend on her mother to live there. And she wouldn't know that until later. Her mother could only not give her any insurance or any of her salary that she made on her own. She had no direct access to that apartment or the family's house. That was never in her name. She is a sloper, but it was in the progeny of the slopers, which were the children. She actually had to go to the board to get their approval to make any major changes to the home. And except for like painting and some other things, she basically could not make any changes. And she also, even though Catherine had been relegated to small rooms to the back of the house, she had every right to bounce her mother into the maid's quarters, because technically that was her home, and she could have put out Lavinia at any time, because Lavinia, as an adult, when she went and decided to try to run off and live with the married Reverend, Lavinia took her small inheritance, and when she took her lump sum, she had no say in the governing or the maintenance of anything on the property. That is the other thing, her backstory. She was never married, and as a licensed social worker, she worked several community events in the early to mid 70s, and that's how she met the Reverend Penniman. And she moved into a small one-bedroom house in Lower Manhattan as they carried on their illicit affair for a number of years. But when he passed away, his family actually moved, and come to find out, she ran out of money. She had lost her job at one point and had run out of money, and was definitely not going to get any support from that wife after the Reverend Penniman died. So she came in to the household as a potential to be almost like a governess, or to help out with Catherine and then her brother before he passed away. But she was crazy. She was poorly equipped to actually help and garner Catherine into womanhood. She, just like the mother, saw her as a competition for the affections of her brother and family members and other men. She was a competition. So she never took, outside of dyeing her own hair and acting dramatic and trying to draw attention to herself, she never taught Catherine or knew how to draw out Catherine of being so reserved and so shy, because Catherine was a smart kid. She saw how people reacted to her shenanigans, and she knew she did not want to act that way. And she definitely had her own fashion sense, but it was a crazy lady with the blonde afro. That's what she was named in the neighborhood. And the only other woman in Catherine's life that could, and she did model positivity, was from her Aunt Almond. Aunt Almond was actually a little bit older than Lavinia, and she was truly the favorite of Austin Sr. She was a beautiful woman with a great smile, and she married a gentleman who was a chef within his own right, and he actually helped to manage the family's coffee shop and nail, and he was an expert pastry chef. And it was in the family's nail and hair shop that she would allow Catherine to showcase her art as far as on nails. And her husband also profited from the vegetables raised in the community gardens that Cat either designed and also helped to cultivate. She was a welcome addition in that house. It seemed like she blossomed with her aunt's positive attention, and she was actually very helpful in with her own children, and she shared love equally as much as she possible, and unconditionally. She never tried to overstep her boundaries when dealing with the great Dr. Ophelia Sloper, because she was the professional, the pediatrician, and her Aunt Almond was more than just a hairstylist and a stay-at-home wife. And she never sought to hurt what she knew was the love of her brother's life, even though she knew her sister-in-law was actually a very neglectful woman. And she would tell her so in so many words in upcoming scenes throughout the remake at Hamilton Heights. And she is kind of almost the non-judgmental, positive version of Ophelia. And I think that was probably one of, also in addition to her broad imagination, that is one of the how this Catherine became great in who she was, because of her exposure to her Aunt Almond's family, in spite of the neglectful and restrictive family unit and the environment that she lived in every day in that home.